once I got to Vancouver. So I need to shut up a little bit and practice what I preach. Um, I was hoping that you guys would be comfortable enough to do Q&A. Um, but Q&As only work when you guys are not awkward. Um, because then everyone just does like a lot of smiling and nodding and then it's really weird. So Tom asked me if I could say a couple of things about the cross, and then if you guys are feeling more comfortable, we can do Q&A. If you feel more comfortable doing something on like online or anonymous, um, we could do papers and pencils. I really, whatever you guys are chill with, I'm chill with. Um, how many of you guys have a hand cross? Okay. How many of you have your hand cross with you? Okay. Okay, sick. Mad respect, dog. Um, okay, good. That's legit. Um, I think I have more than you. I'll compete with you when I visit. Um, every one of you needs to have a hand cross. Um, so the first story in the paradise, I'm more of a monastic style guy. Um, the first story. Have you guys ever heard of the book The Paradise of the Fathers, the Rahban, or the monks? Okay, so like that's a pretty sick book. You should all like invest in it. It's all stories, so like, and they're short stories, so like they're not like too involved. If you have a short attention span like me, like they're nice and short. The first story in the paradise is actually about um, a monk who was forced to move out in the wilderness because he was gonna like move cells or something like that. And anyways, he got stuck in his mind. I don't know what you get stuck in the desert, but something made him like late at night, not where he's supposed to be. Am I the only one hearing the buzzing? Okay, there is a buzzing. Okay, I'm not crazy. Okay, just making sure we're all good. I'm just making sure it's not voices. Um, so the monk is stuck out in the desert, and this whole place is filled with scorpions, right? I've been out in those deserts and I've seen like scorpions. So the big concern was, well, what's going to happen to him when he goes to bed? If he gets bitten, like he'll die and no one's going to find him. And so the first thing he does before he goes to bed is he takes the cross and he does the sign of the cross in all directions. He wakes up, and what does he find? And like as murabba, a square around him, is scorpions that just are not able to cross a particular line, right? And it's the first story in the paradise on purpose. There's so many other cool stories, but they started that because it's the sign of the cross, right? And that's why the monks, actually, another name for the monks is the cross bearers, right? Because to them, they're saying we're living that life of self-denial. Would you guys be scared if I told you like the exorcism story? Okay. I want to tell you this story just because I want you to realize how powerful this is, and it's not because I just want like sci-fi. Because I grew up here, so like I used to think that if somebody was possessed, they were probably just schizophrenic, right, or mentally ill, and that everybody would just assume that there's like a demon when really they're just sick and they need meds. So I liked the stories, but I wasn't sure if I believed them. So I was in, I just finished grade 12, and was it grade 12? Yes. I was either just finished grade 12 or first year. I think I just finished grade 12. Um, and I went to a monastery, and I was getting into Jesus and all that kind of stuff. And so I just, okay, let's act like holy and all these things. So I went into the mountain, and I'm chilling, and I'm praying and reading, and like got my Zen space and all the random words we use, right? And then it was late at night, and I was like, okay, let me go to the church. I'm going to pray Our Father, and I'll bounce and go to bed, because at 4 o'clock in the morning is midnight praise, and so like we're all going to be exhausted. So I go into the church, and for some reason, even though it's like, it was like around 10 p.m., and electricity in the monastery cuts at 11, and 10 o'clock on Saturdays, because they need to conserve, because they don't have money to pay for that much like generated power. So the church is packed, right? And like packed. Like there's hundreds of people. I'm like, what on earth is going on? Like who thought like let's just go chill at church at 10 p.m. So I go to bow down in front of the sanctuary and pray, and I notice that there's an abuna, a monk, standing there, and there's some lady on the ground beside him. I'm not gonna lie, my first thought was like, this looks really inappropriate. Like she's Mr. Highway, she's very relaxed. I'm like, this looks weird. And then she starts making these noises that were very abnormal. It was like a man's voice coming out of her, that like turned into like yells, like that kind of thing from this very feminine woman. So I was like, oh, is she a god demon? And when I'd hear those stories before, I'd be like, I'd bounce, right? I'm gonna check it. Like I'm not cool with that. Like if other people are, they can do it, but I don't want to be there. So for some reason, instead of being freaked out of my mind, which I normally would have been, to be quite honest with you, I found myself like stupid peaceful, like ridiculously peaceful. With just this thought in my head that I didn't know where it was coming from, was saying, sing Kyrie eleison. The devil hates when we call on God. And so in my head, like I wasn't saying anything out loud, I was doing the Kyrie eleisons the same way we do the Kyrie eleisons when we're choosing the Orban. And I started looking around, and I noticed this guy at the back who's holding a baby. And the baby is like 2 or 3 months old max. And the reason why the baby got my attention is because this 2 or 3 month old baby is drinking from a straw. And I'm like, that's a really clever baby. I'm like, I don't think that's normal, but I mean, I'm not a parent. Maybe kids do that these days. And so then I do a double take, because now the baby, I have to put the mic down for this, the baby suddenly is going like this. And I was like, babies can't do that. Like, it was so creepy. Like we're laughing right now because we're not around a campfire, but it was actually really, it was really creepy, okay? And I'm like, that baby is possessed. And the baby was possessed. So the baby was not baptized, and that's why we'll come back to that. And then I knew it was whose baby it was, because suddenly the lady that was on the ground is like jerked upright with her head cranked. Not like movie style where it's like 180 degrees, like she'd die. But she like very unnatural movements, and she just starts screaming, leave my son, with that voice. And the guy holding her baby like legit almost dropped it. And so then Abuna was like, okay, everybody who is afraid, leave. So like 10 people leave of the hundreds, right? I'm like, yeah, right, there's only 10. But people wanted to watch what they thought was gonna be a show, right? So some people leave, and then Abuna's like, no, like this isn't a show. So he goes, okay, everybody get out, everybody. And he starts looking around, like he knows who he's looking for, and then his eyes lock on me, and he goes, except you. I'm like, he's like, yep. And then he said something that he couldn't have known, because I have said nothing out loud, and I'm in the middle of hundreds of people, and he goes, continue praying. So I was just like, okay. So everybody leaves, and now it's just me, Abuna, and the lady, right? And so I'm doing my Kyrie eleisons, Abuna is doing his thing, and the devil's not talking much, there's just a lot of noises, and then I see her like he starts forcing her to do matanyas, prostrations, in front of the sanctuary, and then she just like collapses. So I see Abuna feeling her like baby toe. So I just like, oh, I've seen this in the movies, right? I don't know if you guys have seen the Emma Braun movie. That movie freaked me out as a kid. But anyways, they look for blood because they would tell the demon to leave from like the baby toe, so there'd be no, if there was damage on the way out, that the person would be functional, right? Because sometimes the devil will try and hurt, like when he's being like removed. So I was just like, okay, we're good. She's safe. Like the devil's gone. This is cool. So then Abuna revives her, like to helps her come to, and she's now speaking like a normal woman. And Abuna was like, okay, her baby's not baptized, so meet me. He didn't care, like, it's not like, what's your name? Like, he doesn't care, right? Like, he was just like, okay, we're done. Tomorrow morning, he goes, you'll join me. We're going to baptize her son. And he goes, but if you could please walk her. She's tired. She's had a long day. Like, no kidding. And he's like, if you can walk her to where she's staying, make her some tea, so she can get some rest. So I'm like, cool. So I'm walking engagé with this lady, right, helping support her. She's really tired, right? I take her to her room, I make her shea, and then I go back to like where I'm spending the night, and I'm a celebrity, right? Because they're like, what happened? And I'm like, yeah, it was so easy, like just like this and this, and like telling them all these stories. So I'm like, this is cool. I've got a good story, and I get to tell all my friends back. I'm like, yeah, I was there. So then the next night, I go to the mountains, I pray, I come back, same thing to the church, and it's like deja vu. There they are again, all the people. I'm like, what the heck? I was like, and we did the baptism in the morning, right? So I'm thinking everything's fine. And then when was like, no, it wasn't success. Like the devil was still, and I'm just like, oh. And you sent me with her to like make tea? And I was like, so he goes, but I like that conversation after, actually all he said when he saw me was like, oh, good that you're here. Like, quite nagit. He goes, clean up after me here and then go meet me in the ancient church. So I'm cleaning up, there's broken glass, there's a red sticky substance that I'm pretty sure is blood. Like it had gotten aggressive, so I'm just like, oh, okay. So I clean up, I do all of that, and then I go to the other church. Now the other church is where St. Paul the Anchorite, I don't know if there's an icon of him here. He's probably among you somewhere in the rows. Is that Amabola? Can you hold up Amabola? Just people know who he is. Yes, that dude. Sorry, that holy dude. So his body is somewhere in the ancient church. So the cave of St. Paul is underground. Amontunius, his cave is like at the top of the mountain. Amabola, his cave was underground. Right? So his body is somewhere in the walls there. So they made this fake body-looking thing so people could venerate, but that's not his body. His body is somewhere behind a wall somewhere. So I wouldn't want to go in there because the relics of the saints are often very effective for exorcisms. Like the body of Saint Moses the Black is crazy. And Saint Isidore. Like people won't know someone's possessed and they walk up to it and then there's crazy stuff happens. But anyway, so I go in there. And now, like, there's no fear, right? Like, now, like, if Abuna and the lady are sitting in that bench, I'm sitting, like, right here. I'm just like, like, what's happening today, right? And so then people start getting curious, so they start coming down the stairs, like, in the corner, because they want to attend. And Abuna's like, no. He goes, I wanted you here to pray. I don't want anybody else here. He goes, sit at the bottom of the stairs and don't let anybody in. So these people had started trickling down, and then the lady was like, Itlo bara. Get out. They sprinted. They left their shoes, and they were gone, right? But this time the lady starts talking, but it's not her voice, right? And Abuna is like, you will leave her, and she's gonna go home. You'll leave her, and she will go home, okay? And then the devil goes, I won't keep doing the voice. But he was like, go home to what? Go home to what? He goes, yeah, I just did it. No problem. Thanks a lot, online crew. Um, he goes, go home to what? He goes, I have made everybody hate her. He goes, her husband hates her. Her children hate her. Her friends hate her. Nobody can stand her. Go home to what? Everybody hates her. So then Abuna, without skipping a beat, goes, the Lord of glory loves her. Like, it was instant. And I was like, dang. That wouldn't have been my response. um, and then the lady lunges, this is why I'm telling the story, it was mostly for this point here, lunges at Abuna and grabs him by the neck and starts strangling him. And Abuna, again, he was such a G, right? Abuna, like nothing, literally just holds the cross. And he goes, in the name of the Lord of hosts, I command you to release me. And I promise you, I'm not exaggerating. Boom, like against the wall. And I was like, holy cow. I was like, this Bismillah Salib stuff is real. Okay? The sign of the cross business is a real, it's a real thing, right? The reason why the devil hadn't left her, because the talk's not about exorcism, but is because she had actually made a deal with the devil. She had done like the black magic stuff, Amal, in her village, and she had made a contract. She had drafted a contract, and those people it's very hard to exercise. I won't get into the rest of their conversation, but for me, there was a eureka moment there, right? There was a eureka moment because it was looking at this saying, if this is real, God's real. Because if there's a higher power, it better not be only evil, right? Like, or we're in big trouble, right? But even more than that was what was giving Abuna authority over the devil was the cross, right? What was giving Abuna authority to command him was Christ. It wasn't, I in my name command you. He always said, in the name of the Lord of hosts, the name of the Lord of glory, right? And he would have the cross out. And I'm just like, if that name wasn't powerful, why does the devil care? Right? He can be like, that's nice. In the name of Thomas, like, I don't really care. Right? But it did something. Right? It actually did something. And so it now became not a random object. I'm sorry, online people. I am so not used to mics. But seeing that it did something, took this concept of spirituality, this concept of religion, of being this thing that happens over there, right? Like in some other dimension, in some other world, and made me realize, no, I'm living in that world, right? Even that lady, for example, how many people, if you were told everyone hates her, her husband, her kids, everybody would think the devil had anything to do with that? I would have been like, well, that lady just needs to collect herself. She clearly has a horrible personality, and no one likes her, right? Whatever is wrong with her, she needs to fix it, right? I wouldn't have been like, I would not ever have speculated even that there could be anything else at play other than herself, right? I'm not saying that everybody with a crappy personality is because the devil made them that way, right? But I'm simply saying that I wouldn't have suspected that the devil is manipulating. I'd be like, he has bigger fish to fry, right? But actually everyone is a fish for him to fry, right? The more fish, the better. He likes fish. So does Jesus. So seeing that, right, was a big deal. Then a friend of mine somebody I know got to test the same thing, because the monks told him, always have the cross. So I was told always have a cross. Like, we don't care. I wasn't a priest, right? Like male, female, young, old, priest, not priest, doesn't matter. Always have a pocket cross in your pocket and use it. Sign yourself, sign your seat, sign your getting up, sign everything, right? I was doing that and people thought I was psycho. I'm like, I don't really care. I saw what it can do. And before you go to bed, doing all the signs in the room. So this person that was taught that, he was going up to the cave of St. Anthony's. Almost all my stories come from the monastery. He was going up to the cave of St. Anthony with a friend of his, and they had chosen to go at like 11 p.m., 11 p.m., 11:30, because they're trying to time things to make sure that the liturgy in the cave would be over, and that there wouldn't be a crowd, because like it was a high season. So they're going up to the cave, and electricity's being cut, right? Because now past the timeline for the electricity, and they're taking a break on the way up, because it's like if you're going slowly, it's like a 35-40 minute ascent, right? Or moderate. So they're sitting there, and they're just chilling and they're talking, and suddenly one of them sees like huge lights hitting the side of the mountain. And so he looks at his friend, he's just like, people are coming up right now? And he's like, what are you talking about? And he goes, well, look at the lights, like somebody's got some like supersonic like flashlight, right? Because look at how big those beams are. And he goes, what beams? I'm like, the beams. You don't see light? He's like, no. He's like, for real? He's like, yeah. And he goes, you're freaking me out. Because you got to remember, like, it's night, it's the monastery, and everyone's like anticipating like stuff. And he's like, no, you don't see beams of light. And he's like, no. So the guy pulls out his cross. There's a sign of the cross, and the lights are out. And he goes, oh. So the person was like, you're really freaking me out. He's like, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. So they're sitting there talking more, and after a few minutes, the beams come back. And so he's like doing these side glances. He's like, are you sure you don't see anything? And he's like, I don't, and can you stop? And he was like, no, khalas, like I won't bring it up, right? Did the sign of the cross, and it stopped, right? So when they got to the cave and they prayed, St. Anthony came and dealt with like the demonic stuff, right? But the cross was a way of immediately knowing that the devil was at work. I'll tell you one last story, and then open it up to like any questions or comments or anything like that. There was a youth, everyone I know is from the monastery, that he had just left retreat from the monastery. He was from North America, and he was visiting Egypt. So he was like on fire. He just left his khilwa, his retreat session, right? And they've been telling him, oh, the cross is powerful, the cross is legit, and all this kind of stuff. So he was taking, this is like very early 2000s, when it wasn't a thing that everyone had a cell phone, which is almost inconceivable today. So this person in North America doesn't have a cell phone, and he was going to go visit his aunt in this one city. And so he took the very last train, because he didn't really want to visit his aunt. So he's like, let me get there as late as possible, and I will leave as early as possible in the morning. So what he would usually do is there's these platforms in a row, and usually what would happen is like the train that he would usually take is at platform 4 over here, in this diagram. And usually what would happen is this train that he would take would start on platform 1, because it'll have arrived from somewhere else earlier. So it would move like this. It had to reverse so that it could then come into this channel over here and then go this way, right? So the guy, because he's from North America, usually would get on over here just to be on the safe side, right? He's like, I don't want to take any risks of getting on the wrong train. That day he was exhausted. So he's like, I'm boarding from over here. I've done this a billion times. Like, I know it's the right train. So he gets on. And it was a little different that day, because instead of, it was like the normal train, it was like, I don't know how many of you have seen the trains in Egypt, but it was a third class train where there's only third class, right? It's called Rukab, right? And he's in this car that has no door even, right? Like literally there's no door. So he goes in, and there's all these people from the military that are in it. So it turns out there had been like a military holiday, so there was a special commission train so that people could go back to their posts. The guy didn't know that. So he gets on, and the train starts moving this way, and it just keeps going. Right? And he's like, oh no. Right? Like, he was like, I'm supposed to be going this way. Right? And so then he was like, now this is going to be a big problem. I'm from North America. Right? If I don't get to this town on time, they're going to think something happened to me because they know that I was on there. I have no way of communicating. The next stop is Venezuela, which is a 2-hour train ride. Right? And so it was like, this is going to be a disaster. So the words of the monks who had taught him were in his head, and he goes like, sign of the cross, sign of the cross. So he yanks out his cross, and he asks his intercessors prayers, and just as a sign of the cross on this doorless train. And the train starts slowing immediately to the point that he could jump off. And this is not like the daring type adventure guy, right? So the same, like, just this impulse in his head was just like, get off. So he jumps off, and no one in the train is reacting. Like, no one's like, why are we slowing down, right? Cause like it shouldn't be, right? He jumps off, and the train goes, like, just starts speeding off. So then the trains pass, and he's in this tiny village. This is in the Said, in Upper Egypt, a rural area, and everyone's asleep because it's a farming town. So they sleep really, really like early. So like at 9, the city's dead, and it's like 10:30. And so the guy jokes with his intercessor, and he's like, dude, like, this wasn't that helpful. Um, they're all asleep, right? And so he does the sign of the cross, and then that same clear voice was like, turn around. And turns around, and he sees a giant icon on a door of his intercessor, right? So he smiles like, okay, all right, we're good. So he starts walking in that direction, and then he sees this really old guy sitting in front of his apartment building, just one guy in the middle of the street, like he's been waiting the whole night. And the guy was about to ask him, like, which way to, like, anything, right? And before he's even opened his mouth, the guy literally just goes, and he's like, got it, right? So he goes to the edge, and he finds himself on the main the agricultural road. It's one of the main highways, right? And then he sees some guy leaning against his pickup truck, just like casually leaning, and he goes, "Do you happen to be going to such and such city?" And he's like, "Yeah, hop in." Right? Whereas like if he had been waiting for someone or something, like why? Like he could have just left, right? But the minute that question was, okay, let's go, right? So the person just signed the cross and got there. So I'm trying to say, like, the cross is a big deal. Not as magic, because again, the power of the cross is stemming from the one who was crucified upon it. And the power of the cross, to me and you and to anybody, is a measure of faith and desire to live according to the cross. Right? Like that's what makes it different. Right? That's why a person who is a believer doing the sign of the cross, it has power. But if a believer doesn't really believe just because they're baptized or they're mocking it, it may do nothing. In the same way that a non us. Here you go, folks. When you're praying the Igbeya, when you say, take them away from us, and from all your people and from this holy place that is yours, take your sign of the cross and sign. And it's saying because you're making that place holy, actually, right? So hold your cross when you're doing that. Do it on your seat before you sit down, whatever you're comfortable with, but don't be ashamed of it. That's what I'm saying. What St. Paul is saying was compelling, right? St. Paul is saying, I will not be ashamed of the cross. I don't care that it looks so stupid to everybody else, right? In modern English, that's what he said. He was like, he goes, to the world is foolishness, it's stupid, it's not so, right? Where he's like, but I'm not repping anything other than the cross. He goes, I will gladly rep the cross. I don't care what people say about my cross, because for me it is power. I know what's behind that cross. So get yourself a cross. I used to always, when I go back to the monastery, I'll bring them back. I used to always have a huge stash to give to people, like to have, and wear. And I really encourage you guys to wear a cross outwardly. I used to always wear a cross outwardly, even before priesthood. Not to make a statement to other people, but like, it used to strike me that in Egypt we weren't allowed to. Right? You can't wear a cross out in Egypt. Right? And so to me, it felt like a big luxury in North America that I could. Right? Where it wasn't to tell people, ha, look at me, I'm a Christian. But of saying, no, I'm proud of this, and I'm now living in a place where I'm even allowed to. Right? Where it's not frowned upon. Because then the cross becomes a reminder of who you are, to yourself, and to others, right? And sometimes the physical helps us live the interior better, right? Because it'll remind us who we are, right? It's something that's fastened to you to do it. Hail to the cross. Any questions, comments, criticisms, objections? Crickets. Word. Saying skies. No applause needed. You're all gonna get your crosses. I think Tant has a whole bunch of stuff that people can wear, and keychains and stuff like that. But for sure, you guys must have some cross around your house that you can have in your pocket. It doesn't have to be a big blinging one. It can be small. Go for it. Sorry, I didn't see your hand. If I say them all today, I'll run out of content. So we'll have to, when we're having another chill night, then we will. One more with the cross. Go for it. He's asking a question right now, actually. Perfect. Go ahead. Did the priest know me? He didn't know who I was, no. But there's a funny after story to it, because we never exchanged names. I figured out who he was. Like, I asked him, like, who's the guy? So I figured out who he was, right? But then every time I'd visit that monastery, because that was at Amabobola Monastery, not at St. Anthony's. I hate that. I'm sorry. I don't hate that monastery. I only like St. Anthony's Monastery. So whenever I'd go visit St. Paul's Monastery, I'd run into him, and it seemed intentional, and he would just look at me and be like, and move on, right? So I'm just like, that was our thing. So that happened like 6 or 7 times, so I was convinced, like, this is real. So my brother came for a visit one time while I was there, because George didn't go to Egypt, like, at all. So George came one time, so we went to the Mabola, and there was like some storm, there was all sorts of whatever, so nobody was out in the monastery. And I told George, I'm like, no, you're going to see the monk that I always talk about, and he's going to do the nod, and we're going to be good. So we were there for like an hour and a half, not a living soul, right? And I'm like, maybe it was in my head, this really sucks. And so we start leaving the monastery, and we're heading towards the car, and then literally just as I'm about to exit the door, Abuna comes walking down the stairs, looks at me and goes, and then he goes, can you go get me this from the church? And he's like smiling, and I'm like, I looked at you, I'm like, that's that guy. But no, he's a big baraka, that guy. You would never guess that he's an exorcist. He works like a normal job in the monastery, like, He doesn't put on airs or anything like that. Word. Any other questions? Go for it. So her family are who brought her because they could see that there was something very wrong and hear it because it was weird. So that's why it was harder to exorcise her. I don't know if she ended up being exorcised or not because it's a lot harder. Just like there are ranks of angels, when the angels fell, they maintained their ranks, and so there's hard things that in exorcism I won't pretend to understand all of it. Where some come out easily and some don't. Just like Christ said, this kind, for example, is fasting and prayer, whereas another kind, that command, was okay. But I think the reason why the devil was eager for her to leave was Abuna Fanus, God repose his soul. He was a famous saint from St. Paul's. He was going to be coming into the monastery because he was living in solitude. He was supposed to be coming down the next day, but I was leaving the next day. So when I had left, she hadn't been exorcised yet. But her baby did, thank God. Oh, because the family had spoken to other people. So when I went back to the room, the people who had interacted with the family, they told me, it's just like, oh. Because everyone was wondering, like, why wasn't it, like, effective, like, right from the get-go? Good question. Mm-hmm. If you're not in the cross, you should be very afraid. If not for the cross, then you have every reason to be afraid. Right? This is actually one of the glorious things about St. Anthony, the best saint in the world in history ever. St. Anthony was a straight up G. And when the devil came at him, a normal person would be afraid. Right? But what Anthony said to the devil was, if you have power, go for it. And I mean, who am I? He goes, I am weaker. Me, Anthony, I'm weaker than the weakest of all of you. So if you're trying to have a fight, go for it. You can just send one of them. You don't need all of this. But if you don't have authority, then get this over with. Right? And they couldn't really do anything because he was able to recognize that if it was him on his own strength, no, he's not. Neither am I, neither any of you. Right? Whereas he's a ministering spirit, the devil. He's not a nobody, right? He's very intelligent, a very hardworking person, and he could wreck any one of us, except for the cross, right? So that's why I'm saying, if you live in Christ, you have absolutely nothing to fear, because your boldness, your strength, this is what St. Paul's saying. God forbid that I boast save in the cross of our Lord. That your only source of courage won't be your strength, it will be God's strength, right? So no, there's no reason to fear if you are living in Him. If you're not, it's pretty scary, of course. But I'm saying that there's no need to if you are looking for Christ, which is what we should all be doing, right? And that's also why we say you need to be living in the sacraments, right? You need to be living in the sacraments because that is a huge source of protection. A lot of us don't realize the maroon with which we're sealed, right? The chrism. It's literally a marking of you as God's property. And the devil sees it, right? The devil can see it. He knows who is sealed. And so that's why you need to take seriously the maroon. Actually, here's a cool thing you guys might not notice. When we spray water at you at the end of liturgy, right? Not many people ask, like, why is someone just chucking water at us, right? It's actually really fun. Recommended. I can't wait till it's allowed again. But there's a prayer that we say, today I said out loud, right? Your servants, O Lord, who are treating you, dwell in them, walk among them, who bow their heads before you, dwell in them, walk in them, etc., etc. That is a prayer. It's called the prayer of the laying on of hands. Because when a person was being made a Christian, that was the prayer that we said over them before the receiving of the Holy Spirit. I was saying this is what is the prayer that we say when this person is becoming a Christian and receiving the indwelling of God. And so we pray that prayer to remind everybody of their baptismal prayer. And then we spray you with water to remind you of your baptismal water. To say that you were born from the altar, right? You were born from this grace, and it's from this grace that we derive strength. It's actually really cool when we realize what's actually going on. So if you live in that, no, there's no reason to be afraid, because the devil does not have authority over you. That's why the best the devil can do to any of you or me is give you a sales pitch, right? And then it's all marketing, and then it's up to you whether you want to enter the dialogue and consent, right? That's why the safest thing is to say, sorry, not interested, and slam the door shut. Because once you start talking, good luck, right? Like anyone who does sales knows that if you were able to get the person to talk, you've got a much higher chance of getting the deal, right? Where if you got them to ask a question, if you got them to like engage, right? So the best thing that you can do is don't engage, right? But we have nothing to fear, again, if we are in Christ. Go for it. He wasn't baptized. That seal makes a difference. The seal makes a difference. When she invited the devil into her house, the devil has fair claim over anybody not marked for the Lord, right? And that's why even in like, there's at least one person here who was chrismated as an adult. Those of you who have attended baptisms, you'll see that the prayers have so much about exorcism in them, right? Because the original rites of baptism we did when people were adults, and that most of them weren't coming from Christian backgrounds, because there was no Christianity, right? It was pagan, and so there was witchcraft, sorcery, and all of these things, right? And then what would end up happening is that the process of becoming a Christian was a 3-part process, right? So you had your first session, your first anointing. That's why there's still 3 oil of anointings that happen. And so there'd be welcome, like you're being declared a catechumen, and you would be sealed with just regular holy oil, just olive oil that's prayed over. Then you'd go to phase 2, right? And that would be the hagileon, the oil of exorcism. And there's prayers of exorcisms in both places, and then again at the third, which is the chrism, because of the interaction in the devil's world, right? I was saying you haven't been baptized yet, and so you're vulnerable. Once the person was baptized and sealed, we no longer every week be like, come here, let me do it. So because the devil was in that house, literally, physically, like materially, if you will, spiritually, until that baby was baptized, it was fair game. It's fair game. So I'm saying Christianity is real, right? Too many of us treat Christianity like it's just this idea. Religion is real, not just Christianity. The spiritual world is real. And I think that for so many of us, we treat them like separate worlds. I did, right? That's actually why I like telling that story, was not to be like, oh, this is a good one, like I'll get them engaged. No. It was because for me, it was a big turning point in my own life to say, oh, it's real, right? Because it's easy to talk like the gospel, like turn the other cheek and don't judge me and don't think you're, like all that like touchy-feely, huggy stuff, no problem, that stuff's important too, right? But if we don't place it in the context of it being real, then it's just a lot of blah, 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 blah. That's all it is, right? And we're all good at blah, 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 blahing, right? So it's so important for us to know that we are in a world where all of this is real, whether you believe in it or not, right? Like, the devil doesn't care about what you think of his existence, right? Like, he's not being like, oh man, this guy doesn't believe in me. He's like, great, easier work. He doesn't even think I'm real, right? So Know that it's real, treat it like it's real, and you'll get real results. Monica. I don't. I think that's part of it. No, I think that because in general the East is a little bit more religious, and they, not a little bit more religious, well, until recently, like now I'd say a little bit, but before that much more religious, and actually practicing, not just saying stuff, but actually practicing. It's like exercise. When you exercise, you see the results of exercise. If you're lazy, you don't. So because they actually exercise out there, they would see results. But in the West, where the devil does very much still work like hard, I think the difference is that in the West we tend to worship the intellect and think that we really get everything. And so for the devil to expose himself so radically here goes against his work. That's my personal opinion, right? I can't say this is what he's doing, right? But of saying that, how much of an advantage is it that your enemy doesn't believe you exist? And then it's like, great, right? I can get way more work done because no one's fighting me. So I think that here he doesn't work as overtly. He's working at least as much. He just doesn't have to work in the open because nobody believes in it. And that's why the temptation of the East is different than the West. Because the temptation of the East is to get so obsessed with those things that they forget God. Right? So it's a different kind of warfare where they get so obsessed with the supernatural and the miracles that they just want the gong show, that they forget that there's something behind it. Whereas in the West, it's like we don't even care for the gong show, we're just fine. So it's the devil being very strategic in his war of understanding who he's fighting and how they think. Sorry. Okay. It's the same here. I've seen things here that are crazy. In my own life, in others, especially after becoming a priest and entering people's homes. So it's the same thing. That's what I'm saying. The preparation for a battle and entering the battle is the same. What might differ in different areas is just going to be the landscape, right? So you have to learn your tools at your disposal too. But spiritual life is spiritual life at the end of the day. That's why like, the one thing I'm going to always be hammering home is live the gospel, period. The gospel is our strength, right? The gospel is the cross, right? Because if we live that, we're always going to be ready for the battle, right? And that as we grow, we'll find out where we're strong and where we're weak in that battle. And the devil tends to not expose himself until he's worked through other things first. So for example, St. Anthony himself, because most of us are not going to be in this realm of like, let me punch the devil in the face, right? Whereas St. Anthony, when he first went out of the city, the devil's temptation was not, let me appear to Anthony and tell him he's a moron, right? The first thing that he did was be like, hey buddy, are you sure? You were decently wealthy. Do you really want to sleep on the floor in like some dead guy's tomb? That's so uncomfortable and weird, right? Your life sucks, right? And a normal person would be like, yeah, you're right, right? And it's just like, you can be religious in the world, right? It wasn't even like he was saying deny God, right? He was just saying, you can be religious. You don't need to do this. What's wrong with you, right? When that didn't work, it was just like, Anthony, buddy, your sister. Don't you care about your sister? You have a duty. Right? These are very compelling things. He starts off with who is Antony? What would affect Antony? Right? You should care about your sister, which was most of us would be like, yeah, man, that's true. What about his sister Haram? Like the poor girl. Right? And so he'll tell you, be like, you know what, you should care about this stuff. I agree with you. right? So he's not even disagreeing so that you don't reject him. Like, no, I agree with you. You're on the right track, buddy. It's just not right now. Take care of your sister first. Be religious while taking care of your sister, and then later on, like, go play. Right? Then when Anthony didn't fall for that, then the devil said, guy, this is going to be a really long journey. Right? He tried to show him how exhausting it would be, not how it is, how exhausting it already is when he was like, you're talking about the rest of your life, bro. Like, that sucks. You have no friends. Right? You're literally living on your own. Your food sucks. You're eating dry bread. You're exhausted. You don't sleep. Are you planning on doing this? Because Anthony was only 20. Right? We're not talking actually between 18 and 20. Right? So we're not talking about some guy in his 60s that's been all spiritual and like he learned his lessons, he did what he wanted, and now he's getting religious. It says that his parents died sometime between the age of 18 and 20. Right? And so then now the devil is saying, you got like 60 years with that life expectancy back then, max. You really want to spend the next 6 decades eating crummy food? Sleeping on the floor, dry bread? Bro, that's exhausting. Don't do it. Then he brought him images of women and said, sex isn't wrong, pardon me. He's like, why are you leaving marriage? Marriage isn't wrong. Here's a beautiful madame, right? Why don't you take her, right? Then he brought him money, right? And he started getting more extravagant because like Anthony's going for a walk and there's this tray of money. And Anthony, by then, because he was learning the devil's tricks, was just like, seriously, dude? He goes, really? You're trying to convince me that in the middle of the desert some guy dropped a tray of money and thought, oh, I'll just leave it? Right? Because it was dumb. But because of where his mind was at, he could recognize it. Only after all of those then did the devil go to level whatever where he would manifest. Right? Where he would actually get involved. So I'm saying we're talking about level 4 when most of us, myself included, are really like level 1. Right? But if we're faithful in level 1, it's not about trying to get to level 4. It's that level 4 is just going to happen. Right? No one's trying to do these levels. It's just natural. Right? It's just like when somebody starts working out, you don't get to choose what day you suddenly have biceps. It just happens. Right? Like it's not like, no, this day they're there. Right? Like they're just there. I mean, technically they're already there. Right? But where you can notice them. Okay? So be faithful with little and you won't fear the much. Right? You won't fear the much because you're already jacked. So it started with him with thoughts, and then at one point he would literally just appear, right? Not only did he just appear, Anthony got whipped. Anthony got beat up hard. He got the living daylights beaten out of him in the tomb. That this young kid that used to come and bring him dry bread, and the only reason why they eat dry bread is because it wouldn't expire, right? That was all, like that was the only reason. So the kid that's coming to bring him bread finds him literally almost dead. Physically carries him to the church. Anthony's unconscious, right? He comes to in the church in the middle of the night, and he's like, what am I doing here? And he yells at the guy, and he's like, you take me back right now. Right? Where he's like, no, I'm not leaving that fight. Like he goes, he's not winning. Right? And he goes back and gets beat up again. Right? But in the middle of the beating up, something happens. The ceiling opens up and Christ appears to him. And this is why I really, I hope you guys learn the lives of the saints, because they're so real. Anthony wasn't like, oh, thank God for God, you're here, this is so good, I'm so happy. Which is what, you would think that, the saint would say. St. Anthony's first question, the first thing out of his mouth is, where were you? He was real. right? Like, we're allowed to have our real personality. It's a fair question, right? He's like, no, 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 seriously. Like, I just got whooped. Um, Kontafin, right? Where were you? And the Lord says to him, and he's just like, Anthony, your fight, you were prevailing, was so exemplary, so real, so awesome, that I refused to take away from you your prize, that it's your victory, right? Because you did win. You have that victory. But from here on in, demons ain't gonna touch you. Because I have a different mission for you. You're gonna be teaching other people how to do this, right? So he had that end result. So it was first in the mind, then working through others, then like appearances of things that had like looked real, and then an actual tangible one-on-one thing. Yeah, I know people alive today who have too. Have you guys heard of Abuna Lazarus? He's the former atheist philosophy professor from Australia. So I've known him since I was 17, before he got to be a big deal too. In that, like, he got pushed off of the cliff. So when I came to visit, so before, now he's told the story online, but when I would visit regularly, I came back and I was looking for Abuna, because this is pre-email, pre-writing, pre-all of those days. So I was just like, where's Abuna? And they're like, oh, he's in Cairo because of his treatment. I'm like, for what? I was like, he fell off the mountain. I was like, he fell? Because I'm like, he takes this route every single day. And it's been like, at that point it had been a little over a decade, maybe 10 to 15 years. I'm like, no, how did that? He didn't know how to walk. I was like, so I went to go see him in Cairo. And I just like, Abuna, like, you don't owe me like to open up, because before like the interviews and all that, I'm just gonna ask you one question: pushed or fell? And he like scrunched and he's like pushed. And I was like, okay, makes more sense, right? But because Abuna Lazarus is living a whole other kind of life, right? Abuna Lazarus is somebody who's living the cross. He gave up everything, right? Abuna Lazarus, and I'm just rambling, I should stop, but you should hear him talk about his old motorcycle, right? You see the prayer videos online, he's like, oh, but that bike. He goes like riding that bike fast on an empty road, like are things around his, but he gave it up. So he's like level whatever, that's why the devil comes to him now. But that stuff still happens. It's not, and not just monks. I know married people that's happened to as well, married people with kids, right? It's not just a thing for monks and nuns that are locked up in their rooms, it's a thing in the world too. Okay, guys. Thanks. Please. Yeah. 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 In churches and homes. No, it's real. Or you can go to an altar and you can know that the people around it are fighting. Yeah. Like you can. As I'm saying, it's not like and it's just a natural consequence of health. That's what I think people don't realize. It's like when you're healthy, you're more sensitive to when things are not good and when they are, because you're healthy, right? So a person, for example, who is used to having really clean air and breathing well, that becomes aware of their breathing, the minute something goes funny, they'll know that they're not breathing well. Like they can notice it. And so it's the same thing spiritually, because the spirit is a real thing, right? It's not a fluffy concept. It's a thing in you, right? That has its own sensations and that knows things, right? And kids are more sensitive to it as well. Kids are very, very, very sensitive to it. That's why a lot of infants, I believe, are seeing both sides, like regularly, right? There's a little kid there's a person that sees Pope Kyrillos regularly. He's a convert. And one time there's a bunch of us hanging out, and this one priest kid was sitting on his own. He's like 2 or 3 years old, and he's giggling and laughing. And then we noticed that the other guy, the convert, was laughing too. And we're all like, "What's up with you guys?" And he's like, "Baba is playing with him." So it was like, whatever, you can choose to believe him or not believe him. But then, as the kid is walking to the car, he turns around to where he's playing and he goes, "Bye, kiddo," and gets like right in the car, because their spirits are still untainted. They're still very pure. They still have the ability to see. It's cool. Thanks, guys. All right. Sorry? Oh, I thought somebody said something. My bad. Okay, we'll pray, and then anyone who wants to besounds can besounds. Okie dokie. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. And we ask you, Lord, to hear us through intercessions and prayers of our Holy Mother, the Theotokos, StMary, the great Saint Anthony, Saint Mina, and Pope Kyrillos, when we pray with all thanksgiving, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Praise you, our Lord, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and glory forever. Love of God the Father, grace of begotten Son, the communion of the Holy Spirit to all. Go in peace, the peace will be with you all. Remember, your homework is to have a cross, and then Tant and your servants have a whole bunch of gear. So make your way to the front. Perfect. Okay. Right. Yeah.